Ooh, visible, right?
I was around it.
Just gonna make it clear.
This speaker's gonna stand.
If they stand, they might sit.
Is someone recording this?
Thank you, I appreciate that.
What?
Do you guys want speaker orders? I'm Nueva from the app. I'm Caroline Young. I'm going to be the first and third speaker.
I'm Marisha. I'm going to be the second option.
From my name's Gustav, first speaker. And my name's Thomas, I'll be second speaker.
Hey, amazing. Trigger warning for sexual assault, gender-based violence. That's it. Oh, say slow and clear as necessary. I will pass text every day. Cool. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. So proud to project the resolution today that the United States federal government should significantly decrease restrictions on human gene editing. First on links. First, we tell you that participating in policy debate is a link. Reformism. Affirming forces us to defend the state as a morally good actor when it terminally fails to protect women. We tell you that Warren Casserole v. Gonzalez, when the state or the Supreme Court ruled that the police had no obligation to protect against domestic abuse, even with proven abuse. And we also tell you about abortion policy and Roe v. Wade proves that policy gains are fragile at best and uses wedge issues by Democrats and Republicans. And then we also tell you about masking and it makes us look like this pretending the state can do good things hides the status reproduction violence. But then second is inequality. We tell you gene editing therapies cost a lot of money and it will become a luxury and only the wealthy people will have access, and it creates a massive inequality and striation between rich and poor people. And we tell you it reduces disability care also because the rich can now afford to remove disabilities, and this reifies inequality. But then third is eugenics. We tell you gene editing promotes the rhetoric that people need to be fixed at the genetic level, which deems certain traits as biologically inferior. This is especially true when we reduce restrictions, which increases cosmetic gene editing. This is the same rhetoric that justifies patriarchal violence. Women were seen as the longest time as mutilated men. That's a direct quote from Aristotle. Cool. The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that best alleviates the harms of patriarchy. The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that best alleviates the harms of patriarchy. One is not born a woman. Gender is a social identity produced by specific historical conditions, and through the emergence of private property, patriarchy became a tool for the ruling class to maintain domination. Capitalism characterizes a woman by her ability to reproduce, and the unpaid workforce of reproductive labor is instrumental in the reproduction of capitalism. Two, critical understanding first. Absent substantial upheaval of patriarchy, capitalist policy-making tools and movements are co-opted to further exploitation. And we can only view the world through a capitalist lens right now. New Zealand police officers co-authored a study on how their 2003 expansion of the sex trade was liberatory when in actuality it removed funding from culturally appropriate exit services and created loopholes for police to abuse sex workers, be imperfect victims. Without totalizing theory, movements are co-opted to further exploitation to patriarchal individualism. Amber Heard wasn't a perfect victim, so she became a scapegoat for male rights movements who peddled a mutual abuse narrative, even though IPV experts validated her. To vote for us is to vote for the imperfect victim who fights back against her oppressive patriarchy. 3, debate is key. Debate is the critical site of resistance and training ground for future policymakers and advocates. But the NPDL's drive to ban non-New York Times sources from Brown's bans non-dominant epistemology. Policy to be girl boss feminism means only the worst women win. If you aren't Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton, sorry?
P1.
No, not right now.
Sorry, PFC.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Could you repeat your thing about the NPDL?
Yeah, the NPDL's drive to ban non-New York Times sources from Brown's bans non-dominant epistemology.
Okay.
Cool. My time starts again in 3, 2, 1. Policy to be girl boss feminism means only the worst women win. If you are Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton, you are a good female debater and we disrupt that norm. CFPB's design was initially anti-neoliberal, but it now serves to protect equal factual accountability because Warren's background in policy debate did not prepare to control the neoliberal drive of the state. For patriarchy skews evil, our praise a prior question, Simone de Beauvoir, because patriarchy positions women as the other, women's words are delegitimized on the grounds that they come from women, and testimonial justice means that women's words are pushed aside, and our attempts to address oppression are seen as quarrels, and this means that addressing patriarchal bias in the round comes as a priority. The thesis that it is not the consciousness of men that determines their social being, but their social being that determines their consciousness. The capitalist patriarchy forces dependency both in the debate space with policy debate, girl boss feminism, and materially through the withholding of resources unless we participate in oppressive social structures like the state. Impacts. 1, exploitation of bodies. Biology is used as an ideological justification for gender depression, as seen through the feverish and violent attempts to regulate abortion and define trans women as non-women. Sex workers are seen as commodities of the state and dysfunction of the system, and the dysfunction of patriarchy justifies mass violence as a function of the system. 2, imperialism. Patriarchal ideology in and outside of the imperial core is a driving force in state expansionism and results in the hiding of ecological destruction and cultural genocide in favor of financial gains. In Afghanistan, during and after U.S. imperial occupation, mineral extraction, deforestation, and land degradation worsened significantly, and it was justified by choice feminism protesting vertical laws. With B is microfinancing. We tell you that women in the global south are constantly trapped, rhetoric trapped into these really, really bad systems of oppression and financial debt because of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric. But then 3 is violence. We tell you that the capitalist state is both unwilling and unable to protect non-men. The warrant here is Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, extend everything I tell you right there. But then also that policies and solutions are terminally viewed in a patriarchal lens and are violent to women. Look to how the average office the average office temperature is set by the average rate of a man in a suit. But then also we tell you only male car crash dummies are used to test for car crashes, which means that women are 17% more likely to die in a car crash and 73% more likely to be severely injured. The oldest to vote after wage in Marxist feminist community-based struggle against capitalism. The oldest to vote after wage in Marxist feminist community-based struggle against capitalism. 1, community-based struggle is key. Only our methodology liquidates male chauvinism and creates epistemic and pre-fiat and material post-fiat ruptures. And we tell you that we create exit services. Minorities are currently not socially permitted to wage revolution and are pushed towards fascist protectionism by things like the nuclear family. And we tell you that we create material and ideological exit services like PKK safe houses, but also CWLU liberation schools, which taught women political theory. This is also the internal link to change and the impact of spillover. We tell you 2018 West Virginia teacher strike shut down schools from across the state and also convinced teachers in schools in 4 other states to do so as well. But then 2 is pre-fiat impacts. We tell you to cross-apply debate key framework point 3. This is our only survival strategy, and we're currently being pushed out of debate by things like a casual misogyny, sexual assault. In fact, the NPDL board said that a sexual assault had nothing to do with them and they didn't have to do anything about it. This means that we are currently being pushed out, and only R all offers us a survival strategy. But B, we break the ideological pipeline that turns debater boys into rhetorically gifted incels. This breaks right-wing recruitment strategies. Stormfront, the neo-Nazi magazine, uses inceldom to get new members. But then also C is epistemic rupture. We tell you we create epistemic rupture the second we read this K. It is completely different from our post-fiat impacts, and we already accessed it the second that we read this. But also D, we tell you the only way to fight patriarchy in academia is to endorse feminist arguments, and the ballot is key here, and it allows for anti-Western trains of thoughts. Okay, 3, we also get access to the perm. We tell you that movement building is key and cooperation does this better. And then also that leftist infighting restricts our movement's ability to make change. And if we don't get access to the perm, Nick always wins because they can just run a plan plus counterplan, and 7 minutes isn't enough time to come up with the perfect solution. Cool. Presume app. 1, we tell you capitalist patriarchy skews eval, which means you presume app because we correct for it. If you know something skews your evaluation correct for the bias. But then 2, affirming is harder. We only have 5 minutes to defend against the 12-minute block collapse. For all of these reasons, please vote for the affirmation. Thank you.
Three off case. Is anyone not ready?
Give me 1 second. Very not ready.
Interpretation of the negative need not be burdened with rejoinder against untopical advocacies to clarify they can read their app negates the ballot violation. The one who defends an advocacy externals with the resolution and demands the ballot. Any weakness would concede they don't get the win. The standards. First is limits. Rejecting the resolution explodes app ground and moots 100% of neg prep. They can specialize in 1K for years or read truisms like 2 + 2 = 4 so that app, giving them an infinite edge over team switching topics is outweighed. Subpoint A is the meta constraint. Judges must jurisdictionally resolve fairness violations first because every argument must be evaluated fairly. Subpoint B is burnout. Teams losing unfair debates antagonize against your K, which turns solvency and excludes marginalized debaters from the space. Subpoint C is clash. Truisms are tautological, making clash impossible. A clash allows for engagement and truth testing. The K, which turn journalists into solvency and fairness. Subpoint D is portability. Equal proper parley is necessary for in-depth debates, which are prerequisites prerequisites to accessing any kind of argument. The second standard is constitutivism. Truth testing is intrinsic to debate. NPDL Rule 12.1b states government proposes a case to uphold the resolution, and opposition opposes the government's case to uphold needs to confirm or prove true as to affirm according to 5 dictionaries. Subpoint A, you can't vote for someone not playing the game. It's outside your jurisdiction. Don't wait constitutivism gets their framework arguments decide whether a game is occurring before actually evaluating moves within it. Subpoint B is nonsensical to break the rules while playing the game that justifies me speaking for 1,000 minutes and change speech times. Advocates outside of the round, the voters. 1. Procedural fairness is a voter on fairness cues evaluation. You can't truth test any other question. Fairness is axiomatically good. It's nonsensical to prefer a row without it. Even 1% unfairness is enough to vote negative in this round because we must assume the round starts at 50-50 unfairness. It's 50-50 fairness because anything else is non-verifiable. You can't verify things like school resource disparities or whatever. So therefore, read an interrupt and we'll decide is more fair. The second voter is that return K education because you create antagonism in the underview. First T comes before the role of the value. You have to know the rules of the game before you play. Second, competing interpretations over reasonability. Reasonability is arbitrary and has no bright line. Third, no RBIs because they create a chilling effect on legitimate theory which proliferates abuse. 4, drop the debater because the ballot can only resolve in round unfairness. 5, there's no crossouts from the PMC because we'd always lose if they leverage their unfairness against our offense. Eval T in a vacuum. Next sheet. Neoliberalism subordinates all life to market logic and reframes the subject as a unit of capital as ontological assault that destroys the conditions under which agency becomes possible. The framework. 1. Interrogating neoliberalism is a priori. Subpoint A ensues evaluation of material reality. I think they agree with this. Subpoint B, neoliberalism amplifies other structural violence. Even if you resolve one instance of oppression, it will revive neoliberalism continues to exist. Prison labor generates billions, making the overpolicing of racial minorities a necessity for the neoliberal state. 2 is agency is key. TOC raises hiring fee by $150 this year. My friend Vesta over there was voted down at the Nueva Invitational for dressing casually. Neoliberalism is transforming debate into a for-profit space that removes the ability to think independently without individual agency. Debate will collapse since without people in the space, and accessibility is a logical prereq. 3 is the golden rule. The judge should unconditionally reject neoliberal practices. The requirement that negative solve neoliberalism sends a signal that neoliberal violence is justified since judges are powerless to change it. 4 is the interpretation and role of the judge. Evaluate the 1AC as an object of research and moot case if we want to link. The warrant here is burnout. Bad rhetoric from the 1AC shapes the rest of the debate and therefore makes engagement impossible. This outweighs unexplored mental health. Denying this factor, framing RK links as secondary is accepting the fact that they rely fundamentally on neoliberal logic. The role of the ballot is to resist material oppression. The links. 1 is the Lenin movement. Sheryl Sandberg's Lenin movement encouraged women to negotiate better and ascend the corporate ladder. Feminism never escapes neoliberal control. Okay, they may come up in their next speech and say, oh, well, we're not the Lenin movement, but their failure to recognize that they're not the Lenin movement means that they're silencing bad movements that have affected their movement. Second is imperialism. Saving women is used as a moral justification for Western interventions and regime changes, creating mass violence in the Near East and elsewhere in pursuit of oil and other resources. Neoliberal institutions attach gender equality conditions to loans, also which forces countries to privatize their natural resources and become subject to decades in poverty. The third is self-ownership, the concept that only you can own yourself, denies indigenous societal norms in favor of globalized Western ones. Indigenous framers across many nations treat the body as relational. It belongs to kin, to ancestors, and to land as part of one's identity. And the West relies on self-ownership to justify neoliberalism because if we own ourselves, then we logically can have the fruits of our labor, and taxation is that. 4 is reabsorption. Community-based, quote-unquote, socialist, feminist, quote-unquote, are phrases with high sign value used in political speeches while the world entirely falls apart. 5 is material feminism argues that women's labor should be counted as productive, which accepts the premise that productivity centers what? Centers value. The impacts. 1 is erasure. Subpoint A, neoliberalism creates negative value of life and it entrenches the ideal of productive existence, instilling hopelessness and psychological torture. Those in poverty have 3 times higher depression rates. Subpoint B, 1 is group restraint is non-productive, they are rendered disposable. This is the structural prerequisite to genocide. The first one is over 10 million in colonial India died after the British shifted agriculture away from subsistence to cash crops. The food security of locals was made irrelevant because it generated no extractable value. The second war is queer bodies are subjugated. They're viewed as unproductive because they don't produce children for the neoliberal state. 2 is annexation. Neoliberalism imperatives of endless growth structurally prevents climate action. Ecological costs are externalized. Extraction triggers irreversible feedback loops like Arctic methane release and Amazon dieback, cascading into civilizational collapse through mass agricultural failure and displacement. This has mass death impacts for non-human and human actors. The alternative. Vote negative to reject neoliberalism and embody dual power. Vote negative to reject neoliberalism and embody dual power. 1 is the thesis dual powers constructing collective identities in opposition to neoliberal structures while building capacity to challenge them. 2 is assumption. Subpoint A, dual power means building resistance to state capture through the proliferation of RK. A coalition of students and educators in the debate space can transform debate into dual power. It starts with the judges and emanates out to their students and communities. Subpoint B is galvanizing students. Student movements aren't crushed because the present students delegitimize the state. Look to the anti-fascist students protecting indigenous territories from extraction in Brazil right now. Even when the state tries to movements proliferate under state pressure. The murder of Vietnam protesters at Kent State sparked the first coordinated nationwide student protest. The underview. 1 is serial K failure. Their alternative might be net beneficial, but their justification will doom further alt-sovereignty because they're neoliberal. 2nd is reject all perms. Subpoint A's representations are biting. The 1 discourse has already shaped their rhetoric regardless of attention. Subpoint B is footnoting. The 1 discourse didn't center neoliberal violence. The subpoint C is the perms link itself because it sanitizes their neoliberal movement. They can say they can be as neoliberal as they want because they're trying to resolve for those issues, but that justifies them being infinitely racist. 3rd, reject affirmative theory. Subpoint A claiming theory is a priori. The link is rhetoric that's used to justify what? Oh, like whatever. Actually, just like forget that. 2AC theory is broken. The 2NC can be spread thin. The 2NC has to extend and respond to every single layer, which creates a ton of outs in the 1ER. Times cube doesn't even matter because like you can solve for times cube by being more word efficient or having better word economy. We can never solve for the structural advantage that they have having the last word in debate because they have infinite outs if they spread us out with 2AC theory, which means we turn procedural fairness if they run 2AC theory. 4. Presumption flows negative. Even a failing movement is better than nothing. Epistemic modesty means any risk of resisting neoliberalism is a chance to resolve our impacts, which are erasure and extinction. 5 is the plan inclusive K to all non-neoliberal parts of the affirmative and the negative advocacy. This is double bind. 1. Either their advocacy relies on neoliberalism to exist. 2. It doesn't rely on neoliberalism, which means we solve better without their bad representations. Okay. I have a lot of time. On the rule of the ballot, I think ours naturally precludes theirs. Like, if you resolve material oppression, which they say is the basis of all oppression, then you also naturally resolve for feminist oppression. Next, when you talk about how debate is key and how the NPDL banned non-New York Times sources, this is the NYPDL you're talking about. What we're specifically talking about in this space is the NPDL's collapse into neoliberalism, and we agree that debate is key here, but you don't raise awareness about how the NPDL specifically is actually proliferating neoliberalism and becoming a neoliberal space, and because you don't raise awareness, only we have the access to the try or die here. On your alternative, again, we're going to do all non-neoliberal parts of your alternative. Like there are a lot of disadvantages to your alternative. For example, like there's a the state crushes double bind for like 1. If your movement is actually a threat to the state, if your movement actually challenges these dominant social norms that the state relies on for its existence, the state will crush you because it has superior military capabilities. But then not if it actually doesn't challenge the state, if it's just a bunch of sporadic, random, scattered movements, then you're never actually going to achieve any solvency. Next, when you talk about how like you try to perm the neg, but there's no perm here because you're fundamentally neoliberal. Your rhetoric has already shaped the rest of the entire round, which means you cannot perm our advocacy in your next speech. And also, what the heck is an av perm? Okay, when you talk about how you have to presume av, just extend the reason why you presume neg. But first, when you talk about how material feminism skews or feminism or like the patriarchy skews evaluation, just extend that neoliberalism is the higher skews eval claim here because it naturally precludes theirs. But also, when you talk about the 5-minute versus 12-minute times, you just cross-apply that. We can never check back for the structural skew debate where they have the last word and they can collapse to anything in the PMR, which means that like even if we have 12 minutes in the block, they can correct for that with word economy or whatever.
I
Oh, it's on the floor. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Did you get the outline as well?
This one, like, rejoinder against untopical advocacy. Can you, like, wait, can you define, like, rejoinder against untopical advocacy?
Well, you could have asked POC.
Okay.
You're right.
Cool. Basically, order is just gonna be, I think order is gonna be some layering, then it's gonna be theory, then it's gonna be, I think order is just gonna be layering, then theory, then it's going to be, their K proper. Actually, no, it's gonna be RK, like some extensions from RK, and then it's going to be, our opponent's K. So,
Sorry, can we get that one? Yeah.
I'll try to sign this. It's gonna be just layering, then it's gonna be theory, then it's gonna be RK.
So layering on a new sheet.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, layering, and then
And then theory. And then RK and then your K.
layering, theory, your K, RK.
Yep.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Time starts now. Extend the claim that we tell you that patriarchy skews evaluation specifically because of the Simone de Beauvoir warrant that our opponents literally do not interact with. They tell you that neoliberalism basically precedes this, but they don't really interact with the fact that women's words are literally seen as other. We tell you that patriarchy does indeed exist, and we say that patriarchy is specifically like something that has emerged out of both ideology and material conditions. Our opponents don't really engage with any of our reasoning here, which means that patriarchy skews evaluation. We say that patriarchy skews eval within the debate space as well, in which like the words of women are literally seen as less legitimate, which means that this claim actually goes first. You're going to be extending the K over this, but then we also solve for neoliberalism as shown through our alternative solvency that our opponents literally don't address, which means that our K and our skews eval claim comes first. Then also just correct for patriarchal bias in the debate space by voting AF right now. But then on to this comes over theory because structural fairness basically informs what's considered as procedural fairness to the point at which patriarchy basically defines what we view as fair. You're going to be like viewing the K before the theory. But sorry, I won't take that. I have a lot to get through. But on the counterinterpretation for the theory, we're going to say that the 1AC must we're going to say that the neg need not be burdened with rejoinder against untopical advocacies against the 1AC unless the 1AC defends defends a community, Marxist feminist community-based struggle against capitalism. We're going to say that the counter-interpretation solves for basically all of what they tell you about the fairness skew, because it's only one more position that you need to prepare for, but then it also gives us access to our counter standards of like survival strategy. We tell you that our survival strategy in critical education, our opponents tell you that like critical education is going to be like, is just bad because it's like, there's no clash on like truisms and it causes burnout and things like that. We're going to tell you that like we still have to defend our advocacy. It's not necessarily a truism. We still have to defend the methodology for our advocacy, meaning that truisms literally do not exist in the debate space right now. Then extend like critical education as like being the only type of like good education, and we say, just extend all of that. We tell you that our opponents basically trying to limit us to one specific thing is going to be like really bad for like tone policing, and especially like and basically like telling us to like talk about our oppression in a certain way, which is really, really bad for the survival strategy for women within the debate space. This goes cold conceded. Don't let them talk about survival strategy later, because that's not there. And then they talk about K over T. Oh yeah, we're gonna say that K over T because it skews evaluation. We say that scope and magnitude is higher, and then yeah, okay.
Respond to resentment on the K.
Oh yeah, and then on resentment on the K, we're going to tell you that like we actually don't, we say that like by normalizing the K and like norm setting the K, you actually decrease resentment in it because more people are willing to join the movement. And we say that like the counter-interpretation literally solves for this because you're prepared for it. We say that exposure probably decreases resentment to these types of arguments as well. Don't vote on the theory. Extend the skews eval claims that we give you. And we also say that accessibility, like structural accessibility to the debate space for us is probably going to be a bigger impact than all the fairness and things like that, because if women are not able to access the debate space and the debate space is actively violent towards us, then the theory doesn't matter. Okay, but now onto our opponent's K. They basically give you a lot about like neoliberalism, and I'm gonna go on the links first. So our opponents tell you a lot, like the first about how like the lean-in movement, we actively we don't endorse the lean-in movement. Just because we're feminists does not mean we are like capitalist feminists. Our opponents basically do not listen to like the solvency that we give you, as well as the thesis that we give you on the K, because we're specifically talking about how girl boss feminism is uniquely bad, and we say that unless we actually do this Marxist feminist community-based struggle that comes from both addressing feminism and addressing neoliberalism, we say that these movements aren't actually going to that these movements don't happen. We say that we actually don't link into this whatsoever to imperialism. That is literally to the point at which imperialism is literally an impact on our K. We tell you that traditional models of choice feminism that don't take into consider like material conditions are going to be really, really bad. And then 3 on self-ownership, they say that the body is like relational. We say that like community-based struggle literally solves for this to the point at which like we don't even talk about ownership and property as a thing anyway. Our opponents' links don't even relate to what we're telling you on the K. But then 4th on this like idea of like us using words that have high sign value. First of all, neoliberalism also probably has a high political sign value, but they don't really like address any of the methodology that we give you as to how we're actually educating people and educating women on like critical theory and like political theory so that they can better understand their oppression. Like look to the CWLU liberation schools that go cold conceded. Look to the fact that we actually provide material exit services. We are the only side that provides exit services that actually help people achieve like liberation. But then on the 5th link on material feminism, saying that women's labor is productive, we reject productivity. That was literally the entire thesis of the K. We say that like we don't like capitalism, we don't like productivity, we reject neoliberalism as a function of the K, so the links fail. Okay, but then on their framework, they basically talk about first like ontology is going to be key. Like we're going to say that methodology probably comes over ontology, because without actually having your material conditions like be better, without actually having like a concrete thing that can improve your material conditions, there is literally no way for you to interrogate anything. You can't think if you can't eat. You can't think if you don't have resources. But then they're going to tell you about like over-policing and like neoliberalism in the debate space. We're going to tell you that yes, we agree that neoliberalism happens in the debate space, but if we only focus on neoliberalism and don't focus on misogyny, then basically there is literally no way that women can actually be included in your movement. In order for our opponent's movement to even work, we have to make sure that incels are not in the movement. We have to make sure that it actually addresses patriarchy. There's literally no way that our opponent's movement is going to work. It is going to terminally oppress women if we don't address the question of women first. Look to like the fact that Shining Path revolutionaries in Peru literally viewed neoliberalism as the main concern, which meant that they ended up like killing a lot of women community-based leaders and basically ending soup kitchens, which was really, really bad for women and their material conditions. But then they talk about the judge like rejecting neoliberalism, and the role of the judges of the 1AC is research and like moot cases. We win one of the links. First of all, we win all of their, like they don't win at a single one of their links, but we're probably going to say that this is really, really bad for Clash. We're going to say that like the 1AC is not necessarily a product of research, it's a product of our pedagogy as women in the debate space. We're going to say that yeah. And then they talk about like burnout here. We're gonna say that they just extend like extend what we tell you on like patriarchy, skewing evaluation. We tell you that we have to evaluate the 1AC in order to evaluate like anything that our opponents are saying, because like extend the claim that we give you here. But then on links, not on links. I already did that. On impacts. Yeah, just extend the fact that we also solve for the impacts of neoliberalism, and we probably solve better. We're going to say that like there's a few independent DAs to the alt here to like reject neoliberalism. We're going to say that the first DA is going to be like reject alts are like uniquely bad for reject alts like uniquely get co-opted. Like the movement's going to get co-opted without a clear methodology, like without a clear plan. We say that institutions like end up absorbing the leaders of your movement. So even if you say that you're neoliberalism, or like even if you say that you're neoliberal, if there's no actual movement, if there's no actual methodology that's going to happen, your leaders are just going to get absorbed by these neoliberal institutions, or get absorbed by these patriarchal institutions and oppress women. And then like look to the fact that like Nietzsche's rhetoric was literally used by Nazis, it was literally co-opted. And we're also going to say that patriarchy still exists in your world because you don't actively correct it. You say that neoliberalism is like the root cause of patriarchy, but we're going to say that like movements that address neoliberalism but don't address patriarchy are going to be really, really bad for the rights of women because they view neoliberalism as the prime concern. Like look to Mao, who like didn't view women as like a main concern or whatever. They talk about like collective identity building and the solvency, but look to like the Japan student protest in schools in which they tried to protest against neoliberalism and they tried to protest for like workers' rights and stuff, but literally women were pushed out of the movement, and basically these students essentially forced women to like go in a corner and cook for them. We say that this is going to be really bad for patriarchy. Our opponent's movement is probably going to be a lot worse. And then they talk about like serial K failure on the underview and reject all perms. We're going to say that reps are like, yes, reps are binding, but we don't even link. We actually reject neoliberalism. But then extend what Ari tells you about the fact that we need to create like actual we need to do movement building, as well as the fact that like solving for patriarchy is a prereq because our opponent's movement will literally just oppress women. Otherwise, they say that like 2AC theory is like bad or whatever. They say that like they can see the structural advantage that that neg has. Extend all of our alt solvency because our opponents don't address a single thing on the alt solvency. Extend all of our links as to how debating the topic is uniquely violent for us. The alt has a 100% probability of solving vote AF.
Okay, we're gonna go T and then RK there, or I guess like, yeah, I don't know. I'll try to sign that. Sure. Yeah. So I'll take. Okay. All right. Ready? We're going to go T, and then we're going to go to our links, and then the underview, I guess. And like on T, let's consider the layering to be on the T sheet, okay? The layering stuff. And then we'll go, yeah, to our underview, and then...
Wait, sorry, does layering come after
just
T?
like around. No, layering's on T. I float on T at least.
Okay.
So T, R links, underview,
Yes.
and the rest.
T, our links, underview, and then like the rest.
So framework and context.
Sure. I'll signpost when we get there.
When you say underview, do you mean their underview?
No, I mean our underview.
Okay. And then can you please like, I know these rounds get very like fast
Sure,
and
yes.
you want to get through things, but please like actually stop and like take a sec to be like, okay, next, and like
Sure.
pause as you're moving to the next.
Yeah. All right. My time begins in 3, 2, 1. Now on the framework, on the T framework, they've conceded constitutivism. It is a constitutive feature of debate that they have to affirm the resolution. They've conceded also that constitutivism can be weighed against any other arguments in this round because it is a prerequisite in order to be like it is outside of your jurisdiction to evaluate the K because you are a judge. It's illogical to change the rules of the game while we're playing it. That would justify me speaking for 1,000 minutes. All of this is conceded. This doesn't operate on a fairness level. This is a different voter. This is jurisdiction. This is like a constitutive feature of debate. If you collapse this sort of rule, you collapse debate altogether. They have no impacts on this layer. It's the highest level as articulated in my partner's speech. Here, it's game over. Like, they have no impact here. You can also cross-apply from, or you can extend from the underview that they get no cross-applications from the K. Again, you have to evaluate the T in a vacuum, which means that any of their cross-applications about skews eval claims or any of this are illogical and nonsensical. You can't evaluate them because if the K was unfair in the first place, you can't cross-apply it here. They don't respond to that. On the counterinterp. First of all, the counterinterp doesn't solve it solves for people would just read this exact alt every round, but slightly differently. So you still get infinite unfairness. The counter standards don't really work. First of all, they're mostly defensive. They claim it's a survival strategy, but again, they concede the TVA, which is that they can concede the round and then argue outside of the round. And if the resolution's actually harmful, then Tab will drop it and won't run it in future rounds. You didn't say that?
Atherton.
All right, well, it's a new TVA. They've, conceded, they've not conceded it, but they will. They've also sort of conceded the critical education turn, which is that if we have to make arguments against their K, which again they argue that we do have to in this specific round, then we're going to antagonize against the K because we have to research arguments as to why their K fails, which again turns movement solvency because you can never build a movement when we're constantly coming up with arguments against them. Their like only response here is that more people join the movement when we get broader like access to it and when you spread the movement in more rounds. But again, you can just like turn this. We're antagonized against the K because we're incentivized by competition to push against it. That turns the entirety of K education, which they tell us comes.
You can't have accessibility.
Yeah, if you can't clash, or clash is a prerequisite to accessibility because if we can't clash, then they always wins, which means the debate space classes knowing can engage, but also we can't participate in like arguments that we don't understand. Clash is a prerequisite. We need to be able to understand their arguments, and we can't if they have infinite like prep time and they can read whatever. Essentially, they can't.
Extend the meta constraint.
Yeah. Okay. Extend the meta constraint, which is that fairness is a meta constraint on truth. This comes prior to everything else because in order to evaluate even the K's arguments about skews eval, you first have to evaluate whether those arguments were made in a fair round. Because if we have 1 minute to make our arguments and they have 1,000 minutes, they're going to win every single time. That means we have a prior skews eval claim. You have to be adjudicating based on procedural fairness. Again, jurisdictionally, you evaluate constitutivism first, but then you go to procedural fairness. They've dropped again that like their like drive for the ballot probably is a relink because they have other ways of solving. Okay. Next on the layering. Okay, so they say that like patriarchy skews eval, and that's prior to neoliberalism. Again, they drop this productivity point, which is that like patriarchy is only justified because men are seen as more productive, which is a neoliberal feature. Again, neoliberalism is the only thing that justifies the patriarchy in the first place. This is the only real like sensical logic that's coming as to evaluating between these two skews eval claims, which means that again you have to be evaluating neoliberalism first. When you solve for neoliberalism and you remove productivity as the only signifier of value, you solve for feminism like indirectly. Okay, and then the claims, yeah, we have a prior skews eval claim. They claim the alt solves neolib. We'll talk about that later. All right, on to the underview. Our underview. Extend the 6 point on the underview. They concede the pick. There's a double bind. Either their like reps are terrible, or sorry, either they are linking into neoliberalism and their movement depends on neoliberalism, which means it will fail, or it doesn't depend on neoliberalism and we solve better. Again, insofar as like we're winning a single link, the pick is always going to be working better because again you can just do the alt without neoliberalism. If they depend on any sort of neoliberalism, they're going to fail because again neoliberalism like reifies itself and produces more oppression. So that means that if they link, they lose. Also, they concede the role of the ballot, which is to adjudicate the 1AC solely as an object of research, which means that any link that we're winning means that their research is problematic and you can auto-reject them because otherwise you're spreading their movement outside of the debate space, which is terrible because if it's in any way like bad, then it's automatically rejected. Cross-apply. Yeah.
The 1AC sets the tone for the entire round.
Yeah, cross-apply burnout, the 1AC sets the tone for the entire round. Cross-apply their argument about Amber Heard, if you're imperfect, the state questions. All right, go to the links. Or links. Okay. First of all, you can extend imperialism. Like this is basically like they said the only response here is that they don't have a link. But again, we think that prioritizing defending women over all other things just reifies neoliberal violence. Because again, if you prioritize like only women, then you're justifying imperialism because you're this is what the West uses to justify imperialism because they're liberating women from oppressive regimes allegedly, when in fact they're extracting oil and other resources. Their claim that they solve imperialism doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical because again they don't interrogate neoliberalism in the first place, and if like feminism comes first, then they can justify any sort of neoliberal violence. Yeah. Go to the framework.
Yeah.
All right, fine. Our framework.
Extend that neoliberalism amplifies other structural violence.
Yeah. Okay, extend that neoliberalism amplifies other structural violence.
So even if you resolve...
Yeah, even if you resolve...
patriarchy.
It's going to come back because... neoliberalism just reifies itself. Again, even like prison reform just reifies because the state always has an incentive to maintain...
Shining Path was like a war, like a military movement.
Okay, Shining Path was a military movement?
Yeah, so that's not what we're trying to... We're dual power. We're different.
Right, so dual power is better. I guess onto our alt.
Extend the interpretive role of the judge.
Fine, yeah, extend the interpretive role of the judge. Again, the role of the judge is to
eval the 1AC.
Eval the 1AC. That means that like their links on us aren't going to make sense if they read them in their subsequent speeches. Okay, Yeah, onto our alts. So, like, just comparing the alts, they have a few disads. First, they think that reject alts fail. Again, we're not rejecting. We actually have tangible, arguments. We have material solvency as well. We're building dual power, which is various institutions outside of state control. It's not a reject alt. Second, they claim that patriarchy still exists. Again, we don't think this is true. We think if you resolve for neoliberalism, the only arguments they really have for why, or the only arguments in the round as to why patriarchy exists is because there's this idea that people's value is determined by their productivity. And there's this idea that men are more productive than non-men.
When they talk about Japanese students, they weren't building dual power.
Right, Japanese students weren't building dual power. Look to our examples. Look to the Brazil student movements, which only reify themselves under the state suppression.
Extend that the state will 100% crush their movements.
Yeah, extend that the state crushes argument. Again, they don't depend on student agency, which means that the state will 100% crush their movement because they're directly oppositional to the state. Whereas the alt solves because we are not running oppositional to the state, but instead parallel to it.
That kills 100%
Yeah, that kills
of
100%
future movements.
of
The state will
movement.
make sure it'll never
Right,
happen.
that kills 100% of future movements because the state ensures it'll never happen. They have better nuclear capabilities, which is conceded.
Extend extinction as the impact.
Yeah,
There's no reason why
extinction
it's
is
all
the
fixed.
largest impact because it's the highest magnitude in the round, and it precludes all future value to life. Even if we have a negative value to life in the present day, insofar as there's still people existing, that means that we can have positive value to life in the future. Extinction is the highest order impact because it means that can never happen in the future. We're the only one who solves for extinction. They don't read any extinction weighing.
Also, presumption flows negative.
Yeah,
try or die.
right. Extend the presumption flows neg because it's try or die for solving neoliberalism.
It's going to be T and Ks.
Extend that T comes before the rule of the value, you have to know the rules of the game before you play it. We're going for constitutivism. Even if their arguments sound true and you agree with these arguments, you fundamentally cannot vote for them because they don't provide another jurisdiction for you to evaluate those arguments under. They don't say the jurisdiction of the judge is to evaluate these critical arguments. The jurisdiction of a judge is to evaluate the government side if the government proposes a case to uphold the resolution. Insofar as uphold means to confirm or prove true, they are not truth testing the resolution, they're rejecting the resolution in favor of a different rule of the ballot, which means, sure, we allow them to read their affirmative, but you cannot vote for it as the judges in this round because you've been provided no other jurisdiction in this debate. I think we fundamentally win, even if you agree with their counter standards. None of them matter because, again, extend that you can't weigh constitutivism against anything else in this debate because constitutivism determines what is constitutive of the activity. You are debate judges. You are not critical literature judges, which means you have to vote for the team that's actually doing debating, and our opponents concede they are not debating in this round. They are reading their critical alternative, which means the T comes first. But you can also extend that fairness is a meta constraint on truth. You can't evaluate whether or not their arguments are true, which means they can't cross-apply any of their arguments in response to the T. So their arguments about accessibility or tone policing or that the case use evaluation, none of these can be used as justification for why you look to their K over the T because those are cross-apps from the first speech. Also extend a clash and portability are internal links into solvency and fairness, which means that if they reduce clash in this round, then you lose accessibility because people aren't able to fundamentally engage in your arguments. But you can also extend from our case that accessibility is a try or die because debate is becoming more neoliberal and they footnote it. Okay. Anything else on T? Extend the justification or the implication there, which is drop the ballot, drop the debater because the ballot can only resolve in-round unfairness because unfairness is a meta constraint on truth, which means you can't even adjudicate this round without looking to the fairness question first. Also extend that even 1% of fairness is enough to vote for them. So even if they have marginal defense on our limit standard, which means which is truisms explode the limits of the round, which means they can read any kind of argument that's not the one sentence of the resolution. Then you have to pull the trigger on fairness there as well because even 1% of fairness is enough to vote negative. You can resolve for in-round procedural unfairness. Even if two basketball teams have different levels of funding, you can still call fouls in the game. On the K. Extend the rule of the ballot is to resist material oppression. They don't extend the rule of the ballot, which means you have to look to whichever side best resolves material oppression with their alternative. What's their alt? They concede state crushes. This is a damning concession because 100% of the time their movement is going to lead to the extinction of the movement and all future movement solvency because it's going to be crushed by the state's superior military capabilities. They have no pushback against this, which means you flow through with 100% strength of link. The state is going to crush their movements, but we're going to extend on our alternative. We have a risk of solvency insofar as they never say that the state crushes our movement, and Thomas extends brilliantly that student movements aren't crushed specifically because suppressing students delegitimizes the state, which means we're the only side with the risk of marginal solvency in this round. Therefore, presumption also flows negative, even if you look to the link layer. We are a try or die here. Also, they don't extend their harms to be incredibly skeptical of their movement in the next speech. Also extend that agency is key, and we're the only team who actually raises awareness about the NPDL shift towards neoliberalism. Our opponents don't do that in their first speech, which means it's also a try or die for the affirmative in this round, for the negative in this round. And then we can also collapse through the impact of extinction here. Extinction is the reason why you're voting for us in this debate, because our opponents never articulate why they uniquely solve for extinction by resolving the patriarchy. Because if you resolve the patriarchy, that doesn't resolve all the downstream neoliberal impacts that we have highlighted in our speeches, which is like the endless expansion of the neoliberal state and the extraction of natural resources, which leads to extinction. Even if you resolve for patriarchy, neoliberalism isn't going to reify the patriarchy insofar as I say this is, we say in our first speech, this is a prior excuse eval claim because it reifies all other oppression. So even if you like resolve for another kind of oppression, neoliberalism is going to bring it back into the world. Anything? Okay. Oh, the pick is incredibly clean. Our what link did you instead?
The links on the K, or the TVA, and then the...
Okay, extend the TVA, they could have conceded the round, and also extend imperialism, how justifications use, they use the patriarchy as a justification to go into other states and try them.
Okay, great speed. I would focus on a new sheet. It's gonna go layering, theory, and then I'll go pre-field layer and then post-field layer. Yeah. I don't think I'll go that fast, but say slow if you need it. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. First, we tell you to prefer pre-field over post-field because it's the closest impact to the round, and they never give you any layering here, so you probably buy this. So like any of their post-field impacts and like all of their extinction stuff matters a lot less than any pre-field impact that we have in any epistemic rupture that we do in the round. And we gave you this from the very first speech, and we think that like this goes drop, so you probably buy this here. But also we tell you to like layer structural fairness over procedural fairness because A, it's conceded that patriarchy skews evaluation, which means like you can't even evaluate the fairness of the round or like the fairness of the rules because all the fairness of these rules are like embedded in patriarchy. And we tell you that from the very beginning. We give you a warrant about Simone de Beauvoir and like how women's words are delegitimized on the grounds that they come from women. We think this is really important, and they really never address it. And we think that this is why you're always going to be layer structural over procedural. But we also tell you it affects all the rounds. Like in debate after this, we think that like we create epistemic rupture and like also be norm set a lot of times for like all the rounds after this. We think that like any of their procedural stuff probably only applies to this round. They have no link for how the like procedural fairness stuff is going to apply to like any rounds outside of this. We think that they never read this, or like even if they read norm setting in the first speech, it was never extended through the like back half. So we think that's important. Patriarchy skews eval regardless of whether or not they're okay or whether or not their theory is true. So we think that you presume after as well to like use your ballot to address the skewing. We tell you like time skew and all this stuff is infinite, like kind of ignore that, sure.
I think the extension of presumption flows aft is the shot extension.
I think I extended that in the MG. I specifically extended like affirming is harder, and then also patriarchy skews it.
Alright.
My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Also on probability, we tell you we probably win here because like I told you that there is 100% probability of this epistemic rupture happening the second I read this K. That all of their like impacts happen outside of it, and like they assume like there is more stuff happening on the other end, but that means that, like we don't know that it's actually gonna happen. We think we win right here on a probability. But I'll go in theory really quickly. Okay, on the interp, we tell you to extend the counter interp that it's like unless it defends the all. We think that this solves for all the fairness skew. They tell you it doesn't solve and there's infinite unfairness. We think this isn't true because you cannot predict that it's either going to be case or it's going to be this one all. We think this is really important to like allow for our survival strategy and thing. They tell us that we can't crossplay the K at all. I would say that we can. We can.
Any articulation, warrant or not, is new that you can make cross implications from the PMC.
Sure, that's fine. My time starts again in 3, 2, 1. On the new TVA that we could have done this outside of round, I think this is really bad, and it's continuing to push women outside of debate because we tell you this was our only way to survive in the debate space. It's the only way for women to survive in the debate space, and the debate space is specifically key for women. Extend our framework point 3 about how the debate is key, and like it allows for like the future policymakers to like actually learn how to like be advocates and stuff like that. We think this is really important. We don't think that this TVA slows through whatsoever. Also, they tell us that like people research arguments against it, and that creates resentment and stuff like that. We think that this gains truth testing, which probably goes against all their stuff about how you can't truth test the K. We think that when they tell you that like people will research arguments against it, there is truth testing here. There's also like more legitimacy that's being gained for our movement. We think this is really good. They also tell you there's no clash, there's no accessibility. Clearly they clashed. I think that's fine. But also they tell us that like also we think that the counter interp solves for clash. Okay. Meta constraint, we tell you that you have to like evaluate like patriarchy before anything else because again, patriarchy skews eval. So you're like evaluation of any fairness whatsoever outside of like a patriarchy or like anything in this round is only going to be like affected by patriarchy, which means it comes as a prior question. We told you this again in the PMC and it goes unaddressed by the other side. We think that this is where you vote. And yeah, we think that we pre-reg harder. Also, they tell us to let like Actually, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go on to the pre-field level. We think that, like, it doesn't matter, like, ignore all the double bind stuff and all the stuff on the alt solvency on the post-field level because they never give you any response to our pre-field level alt solvency, and we think that this is what you're gonna be voting on here today. We tell you specifically that we, like, created epistemic rupture the second we started talking about feminism, and, like, it's really important. The ballot is key to endorse feminist arguments and, like, allow for anti-Western trains of thought, and, like, it's the only way to solve for, like, patriarchy in academia, and we think this is really important. They never tell you about this. We also, again, think that this is the cleanest place to vote because they never address it, and also on probability, we told you there's a 100% probability that it happened the second we read the argument, and they never address this as well. We think that, like, on the way in here, we probably win on the pre-field. They also never give you any pre-field impacts unless, like, you think about, like, procedural fairness, but we think that we uplayered procedural fairness with structural fairness, again, because patriarchy skews eval, but also, like, we'd say that we don't link into their K, like, they tell us that our Speech Act, like, means that we endorse neoliberalism. We think that this isn't true. We specifically address neoliberalism. Like, look to how our links were specifically about how, like, there's gonna be, like, class differences and there's gonna be a wealth divide when you, like, make us, like, affirm the resolution, that we think, like, we actually did address neoliberalism quite well. We don't think our Speech Act did anything against it. We think we probably solved for it and, like, addressed that bias as well. We also think that, like, our post-field movement, on the post-field movement, we think that, like, the alts are probably the same in that they're both going to solve for neoliberalism, but we think that the actual delta here is that we actually fix against patriarchy, because even if patriarchy stemmed from neoliberalism in the first place, even though we say that it stemmed from both neoliberalism and also ideological reasons, and we think that that's not addressed either, extend what Richard tells you here, but also, even if you do buy that it stems specifically from neoliberalism, we think that solving for neoliberalism doesn't go back and solve for that root cause of causing the patriarchy. We think that the patriarchy will continue to exist. Look to what Richard tells you about the Japanese, like, students. They tell us that, like, that wasn't dual power. We think that, first of all, it was dual power, but even if it wasn't, the same incentive exists where, like, people will continue to be patriarchal and, like, continue to use women because, like, it's easier for the movement to, like, get better and stuff like that. And that means that if we don't actually focus on, like, women, then we're always going to be, like, co-opted into patriarchal, like, individualism in these future movements, and that's always going to happen in their post-field world. That means they're all can never ever solve for patriarchy. This isn't addressed. So Rishka brought this up in the MG, and this is, like, also where if you really care about the post-field, I guess you can vote here. But also in the double bind, we think that we have solvency. Like, look to the PKK safe houses and look to the CWLU, like, daycare initiatives. We tell you there are a bunch of these. Yeah.
On the state crushes double bind, I don't have a response on it.
We just extended
alt solvency, which is
about decreasing dependency.
which is all the warrants about how we have solvency.
I think the cross out to state crushes, but up to Penn.
Okay, judge's discretion. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. We think that we've had a lot of these movements that we were able to highlight. That's part of our epistemic rupture, by the way, highlighting successful movements. But also we tell you that, like, we've had a lot of these movements that are actually able to do things without, like, getting crushed by the state because they create these exit services from the state and reduce dependency on the state. And that's the answer to state crushes. Also, thank you.